Well, hello, everyone. My name is Chris Detzel, if you don't know me by now, and welcome to another Reltio community show. Today's special guest, Chris Iloff, he's a director of customer success, will be presenting specifically on how to build an MDM, master data management practice from the ground up. So Chris has had several years of experience previous to Reltio on building master data management practices. So I thought he would be a perfect fit to do this particular show. So Chris, thank you so much for coming. Really do appreciate it. Definitely excited about that. So the rules of the show, it's normal. Please keep yourself on mute. All questions should be asked in chat, or feel free to take yourself off of mute and ask. I will make sure to ask your questions for sure if you have any. The community show will be recorded and posted to the Reltio community as usual. And then we do have several community shows coming up. I'll let you know what they are. One is today's show on how to build a master data management practice from the ground up. Next week, we have the new modern Reltio user interface, or user experience. We have a CCAB lunch and learn session. So that's an ongoing session to really have kind of an influence in our docs.reltio.com kind of content strategy. So if you want to be part of that, let me know. And then July 14th, I did skip kind of the early July timeframe just because of July 4th and the holiday here in the US. But we do have a Reltio show on UI configuration self-service. And then on the 19th, something very interesting and I'm looking forward to, a little bit different outside of the Reltio product, but it's called Natural Language Processing, Text Representations in MDM. And then moving data in and out of the Reltio, it's a cakewalk, and a lot of people are very interested in that. And then another exciting one is machine learning based matching. I know we wanted to do that a while back and we finally rescheduled. And then we have a customer coming on with Ian on Reltio Integration Hub with Sajid Said at Vera. So looking forward to all of those. We're packed with tons of really great shows coming up here over the summer. But let's get started, Chris, with today's show on how to start with your how to build an MDM practice from ground up.
All right, cool. Thanks, Chris. I'll get to sharing my screen here a minute. And of course, right when I went to pull it up, I had the Okta message telling me to sign in. So perfect, right? So we avoided a little bit of that. Yeah. Hang on a second. I want to make sure you all can actually see my screen accurately. I know it gets a little wonky. Sorry about that.
You're not showing anything yet.
Yeah, I know it was, it got a little spooked on me there when I went to the slideshow. So we'll just do it kind of old schooly here. It did full screen on me.
Cool, let's see it.
So everybody can see it. Unfortunately, you'll see the little side banner here, but oh well. It's the content and it's our conversation that matters today, right? So what we're going to talk about today is really more about methodology, right? So unfortunately, we're not, for some of those that are wanting to be into the bits and the bytes of things, I know we can talk about that a lot, and it's very exciting to talk about. But there's an equally important part around your master data management piece, right? Of treating it more like a practice and not just yet another IT system, right? And that's going to be a theme here that we have, not only in this session, but this is really the kickoff to a series around this, around the methodology, the practice of MDM, right? So the convergence of the great technology around Reltio and other MDM technologies, right? But not just that systemic view, right, around technology and what you can do and technology capabilities, but how you apply that in the practice of it, right? And how you build teams around this and coalesce around building up this practice, and how that approach is critical to being successful with your MDM and continuing to add value into your organizations with MDM.
And Chris, I just should have mentioned this, is we would like this also to be a little bit more conversational. So we know that you have had, or a lot of folks here have had a lot of experience in master data management and the practice of. So if you agree, disagree, or feel like, there should be something added to this, then please feel free to speak up, because this is today, I want to see this as more of conversational, but also for future sessions like this, we want to do more conversational around the practice itself. We'll get deeper, like Chris said, but this one is a little bit different than usual, and we're pushing for more of that conversation. So thanks, Chris.
No problem. So, yep, another picture of me. You don't need to see that. But where am I coming from this is really having experienced a lot of what you are all in different phases of experiencing in the past as well. So, or in some of you currently, but in my past. And then, with conversations with all of our great customers of Reltio, right? And being able to have these conversations as a customer success representative with great customers like you all, and really vetting out these similar kind of life experiences and the experiences of not just the implementation, right? But how did MDM come to be within your organization? What was the inception of it? What was the key driver? We'll talk about kind of commonly how that happens, what brings MDM to life and gets us all assigned to these projects that build this awesome practice called MDM. And then we'll talk a little bit about the implementation and keys to success and pitfalls there, right? Things that some of you may be involved in implementations today. And if you are, please, feel free to ask about that. And I know that many of you on the call today are probably post-implementation, right? So, feel free to share some of your stories as well as we move through this around, pitfalls you've seen and keys to success that you may have as well. And then we get into, really what we call continuous evolution. And this is kind of the big chunk of it, right? So it's the day one, right after your go live, and how do you keep things moving forward with MDM, which is a big struggle, right? You can struggle with this if you don't avoid some of the pitfalls, and it's hard to avoid the pitfalls if you don't know about them. So that's why this series, right, is really coming to fruition here, is so that we can share our experiences together, right? I can share what I've seen with my own experience and the experience of our customers as well. And we can all get to a point where we're super successful in building out these practices, and we don't see this kind of lag between implementation and continuous evolution. We'll talk about that here going forward as well. But onward. So key here, and you'll see this is a theme that we're going to keep driving home, and I already mentioned it. It's in the title. We've mentioned it a few times. MDM's a practice, right? But it's a practice of this continuous evolution, as we talked about. We see, inception comes and some of us are involved in that phase, but I know in my own experience and a lot of others, not really. Kind of you're handed this project at more of the we're ready to start and we need you on this project type of phase. But there's definitely, some strategic meetings and things like that going on, right? There's a whole process around how these large programs, if you will, spin up an understanding of MDM as a need, and then fund the project, if you will. Then we get the implementation phase where everybody's focused on getting a technology in place, data transformation, all that stuff, right? And then what happens after that? That's kind of the day one stuff, like I talked about a moment ago, and how you roll through on the continuous evolution, which is the longer running part of really your MDM practice, right? So just laying it out as this is high level, very high level. As we go through this series, so today we'll kind of talk at this high level through these and these bullet points, but as we go through and we have other sessions via community, we will dial in and we'll focus on very specific points of each one of these containers here. Just out of curiosity, has anyone on this call been involved in kind of this, inception phase where they were part of the strategic discussion, maybe that brought on that, hey, I think we need MDM or a decision there? I know some may have been involved in like a rip and replace where you had an existing solution, you're replacing that MDM, but has anybody been involved from, what started the first build of an MDM?
Yes, I have been involved.
Okay.
Just latter.
Awesome. Well, let's make sure we get some of your feedback here and great insights as well as we continue this conversation, and better understand some of the what happens in those spaces and how we declare the dependency of MDM. But in general, I mean, IT is part of the business, right? It may kind of, in large enterprises, get treated kind of as a second-class citizen in some cases, right? Because it's, oh, that's an IT thing, right? And not necessarily always on the same level as, marketing or finance or other, key large business functions within an enterprise, but it's absolutely there, right? And they're part of strategic planning, part of understanding what is the work that IT needs to do to achieve the business goals, right, for this year or onward, right, long-term running goals. And where we see those long-term running goals and this need for a long investment is where things like programs get spun up, and programs harness, funding of multiple projects, right? And what we see are, today, a lot of, businesses are driving initiatives around customer experience, operational efficiency, and risk mitigation. We see this in the light of programs that are, talking about digital transformation, where we're moving things into the cloud, right, as enterprises, or even, Salesforce implementations, right, things like that. So this is where kind of the strategic, how do we meet these key business initiatives and objectives? Well, we need to do X, Y, Z, and there's conversations that come up to put things like MDM at the forefront as dependencies, right? Digital transformation, Salesforce migrations, things like this that we're seeing in more current times, all get conversations around, well, we definitely got to focus on the data. What do we need to do to the data? And this is where, well, we need MDM, we need a customer 360, we need a holistic view, we need a source of truth, right? Those things are understood. And this is where the funding comes into play that usually brings MDM into the space as something that needs to be executed on and built. So the dependency gets declared in these strategic sessions, the projects get funded, and then things get scheduled out. And MDM becomes one of these foundational type of, or enablement type of projects that needs to happen really before the target space thing that's getting a lot more of the attention happens. But that's the initial set of investment and funding. Investment and funding is key to understand, because it's not only why you did the project in the first place, but it's going to be what you need to keep that continuous evolution going forward.
Hey, Chris.
Yep.
Sandro mentions that he started with both inception and migration, and he says IT drove the MDM inception at Empire, so that caused them to some grief, because many of the business use cases were not known and thus not factored into the design. So business involvement will optimize your success. So in a number of those initial business use cases will help, instead of trying to anticipate how the business may use MDM. So I think that's a very good point.
Yeah, it's a fantastic point. And we'll touch on that a little bit, Sandro, and kind of more around the periphery of that. But yeah, alignment with business and all of the data stakeholders is absolutely key. And as we dive into the implementation factor, and really you want to do it up front as best you can here, but alignment to those stakeholders is 100% key, so that you understand where you're adding value to the business and you can attach to that directly.
Somebody told me once, and it's from our executive council, he goes, the key is to not talk about master data management sometimes to the business, because they don't know what that is. It's what business problems is it going to solve at the end of the day? So
absolutely. So I know in my experience, I wasn't part of the kind of inception type of decision, right? But was brought in more in this space, in the implementation space. So once it was decided that we were going to do MDM, it was, hey, we're going to do this thing, the project's scheduled, let's go build it, right? So one of the key lessons learned I had was, I'm an IT guy, development background all the way through, done a lot of different things in the SDLC for many years of my life, until I got this project back in, I think it was like 2008, 2009. And I focused on it like an IT system, right? So when I say build a practice, not an IT system, this is a lesson that I learned as we do learn lessons in life sometimes the hard way. You do it wrong the first time, and you spend a lot of energy trying to correct it, and then double back and take a view and say, so, how could I have avoided some of these pitfalls? So this is a lot of my own personal experience, as well as validating again with a lot of you all as customers and understanding some of the experiences like Sandro just shared, which are great. Implementation, I think oftentimes is where a lot of us first get our taste of MDM, and get involved. And we're trying to understand this as we're executing this implementation. A lot of times there's partners obviously helping it, either, consultant firms or software, consultants like professional services with Reltio and things like that are involved to help you along that. But oftentimes, unless you're doing a complete rip and replace, this is something that is a little bit foreign to most people involved in the IT implementation. But, obviously the basics here, right? Scope gets defined, the project gets executed, and go live is when you have whatever your initial domain is, if it's customer, if it's, provider, if it's member, if it's whatever initial domain that is responsible for enabling the core key program, right? That's the overall funding mechanism, is usually the scope and focus of your initial implementation. And some of the things we see with this usually is that there's a focus on building it as an IT system. And as Sandro said, exactly, there's not a lot of business inclusion, right? So this is where we talk about the data stakeholders. And these stakeholder partnerships are absolutely 100% key. You have to be tied to the folks in the business app space that, that own the data, right? And we can talk about some of the back and forth between owning the data and not really owning the data on another time, or perhaps over, some cocktails. But having that partnership way up front, right, as you're kicking off the project, so that everybody's really aligned, right, on what the practice roadmap is, you can build that together. That you're building a practice execution framework, because there's accountability involved in many constituents that are just not IT constituents and may not be part of the the close-knit MDM team. It's important to, as you're building this, right, as you're doing an implementation of technology, that you're actually trying to understand what are the skill sets I need, right, to support this thing when it goes live, so you can manage it and keep the lights on, as well as more accurately steward the data, right, and have partnerships with those stakeholders so that it's clear, who's going to be doing the data quality remediation, who's going to be, the experts in other pieces of stewardship, from anything from potential match work, and again, to other data quality issues that maybe need to pipe back to source or that hit downstream systems and consumers. It's really important to know your data, of course, right? So being familiar with it, having done some data analysis, up front, so that you understand and have kind of some predictive understanding of where the gaps are in the data, that you understand what the outcome expectations might be, so that you're better aligned to it, will save you time iterating through the outcomes of your MDM, and save you time as you're developing and constructing match rule sets and the technology aspects of it like that. And it's important that, again, these stakeholders understand those pieces of it too. It really is, because otherwise it's just kind of this invisible thing that's happening behind the wall. And we all know that, those of us who've experienced these implementations, those of you who are past implementation and really working on the continuous evolution, you all know that it's when it's a black box, there's a trust issue there sometimes with a lot of business partners. So making sure that they're in fold early on the implementation side, that you're developing those partnerships, and that you're really building out all of the constituents of a practice, a cross-functional constituency for this practice, are absolutely key. Iterative development is definitely a key, especially as we talk about the continuous evolution. But when we see this, and you'll see a graph in an upcoming slide, what we see through implementations oftentimes is, because of kind of that black box type of mentality of the magic going on in the algorithm in the background, and because you're waiting really for this end state that's anywhere from 3, 6, 9, sometimes even 12 months later in large implementations, for this entity, right? This master customer, this master provider, this master, whatever this business entity is the end goal. And it takes a lot of time to get there. And it's really difficult to kind of reinsert people after that, have them trust it, have them understand what's happening and why that entity is right, why it's correct, why it's better, right? So making sure that you can have some iterative milestones and doing, it doesn't necessarily have to be agile, but deliver things in an iterative motion, not just a big bang at the very end. Here's your new entity, trust us, it works, right? Making sure that you're tied to those data stakeholders and that you're delivering value at critical points and critical milestones along the way. Critical to being able to do that, I think, is a modern MDM approach, right? We're all looking at the cloud now, right? So there's definitely implications of how you can do that iterative development, how you can achieve value faster, right? To kind of keep the attention of those critical data stakeholders by showing value that your MDM practice is providing along the way as you implement. Whereas some of the legacy MDM still really require a lot of this heavy lifting of data transformation and ETL in and out of their solutions, the building of infrastructure, right? All of these things that take a lot of time and money, right? So modern MDMs are something we want to understand there, and we'll dive into some of that in future sessions as well. So based on your own experiences, any pitfalls that haven't been talked about here for folks that have gone through like an implementation and kind of seen what it's like a little bit after the implementation, had some time to look back on it? And anybody here have some input as to keys to success maybe that we didn't talk about here, or pitfalls that you saw?
I have a comment. Hey, Chris, this is Kurt. How you doing?
Hey, Kurt, how's it going?
Good. So just coming off of an implementation, I think one of the really interesting things for me was and this is exactly on the point of having know your data highlighted on your slide. So not only do you have to know your data, like you said, but the business users have to see the data that is being licensed. For example, in many cases, you're getting data from a third party. Let's say it's IQVIA or some other vendor of third-party data. You need to put that data in front of the users, show them what it contains, and confirm with the users that the data has the information they're actually looking for. Because oftentimes they make assumptions. Oh, well, we're going to license this data. It's going to have pharmacy, if this are life sciences, for example, which is the implementation I'm coming off of now, right? Well, of course, it's going to have compounding pharmacies. Of course, it's going to have wholesalers and buying organizations. Of course, it's going to have all this. And it turns out that it may not, but even if it does, it may not be in a form that's directly accessible from the data, right? You may have to create some complex and interesting queries or ways of teasing out what it is they're actually looking for. So I think it's really important to put that data in front of the users and make sure it contains what they're looking for, and they're going to be satisfied with the information that they licensed.
Yeah, absolutely. Great point. And, Kurt, I would even extend that to say what Bill's talking about in the chat there, as well as in my experiences. Heck, I even had, business application owners that didn't know the data coming out of their application, right? And this is like a custom internal application, right? And we see that too, where you end up with data quality issues, or, well, that's not my data, I didn't know it looked like that type of thing, right? They're so used to kind of their interface and maybe a set of reports that they don't see kind of the raw materials, if you will. So I think that's a great comments from both of you. Thanks, Suspended. Yeah, you're right. It may require further enrichment and transformation before you're able to actually, there's going to be some processing to make the data consumable to your MDM solution and get the outcomes expected. So it's important to have that visibility and alignment through all those data stakeholders without knowing your data.
Hey, Chris, it's Sandro. One of the things that, and I'm not sure how common this is going to be, but because there was very lack of experience in master data management at Empire Life, they actually ended up getting a third party to do the development work. And then it was handed off, right? Which caused a lot of problems as well. So that our developers, for example, didn't really have a good understanding of what was delivered. and it took a long time to resolve, issues that we would run into sort of down the line. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that make sure you have your IT folks involved right from the beginning, and whether they're going to be mirroring or working with a third party, that they know everything that's being done right from the beginning. Otherwise, it becomes, again, problematic to fix things after the fact when the third party vendors left. But having said that, making fixes after the fact or changing the data model or whatever happens as a result of things like that, I have to tell you that Informatica, which is what we use, was very difficult to make those kinds of changes after the fact. It took a long time to kind of run through that life cycle. I think the way you guys have designed Reltio, the configuration side of it is a lot more straightforward. So I think you do have the luxury of being able to fix things a lot quicker and be able to test it in this environment than you would have in sort of a traditional MDM on-premise environment. So, I mean, kudos to you folks for that ability. But again, the more you can do right up front, obviously, the better it is, and not having to make changes down the line because you didn't take into account all the business rules, or you didn't have folks that understood how it all worked.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for that. Really good stuff. So next is a slide. I'll kind of show you where, what we've seen, what I've seen, even like I said, in my own experience, and then even being able to map some of the data that we see from Reltio, right, after implementations. And we take a view of, this is all kind of a perspective of a view from when a customer buys Reltio to when a customer is done with their go live to when a customer is ready to expand on their implementation, right? So the purple line there is what we've seen when it gets treated like an IT solution creation, right? When you don't avoid the pitfalls that were on the previous, right? And to everything that we're all kind of aligning on and saying here, when people don't understand the data, when you don't have those partnerships going in, and when there isn't really a clear understanding of kind of the business value even as part of it that keeps people on that journey and through it. Everything that we all just talked about, right? This is how you kind of see it. It looks a lot like, if anybody's ever seen like the hype cycle curve, it's very similar to that when we mapped it out. Now, this isn't a true representation of the data. It's I'll be honest, it's a kind of a SketchUp of what that curve really looks like. But what we see is in the purple, when you have that technology focus, right, and you're not building this constituency to build out the full practice, is really this kind of stall, right, and this lag where it takes a while to get things back up and running. And it's exactly some of the things that you talked about, Sandro. It's a lot of, if you haven't focused on building the practice, then you're focusing on it here after you've implemented. And so you're really going through that forming, storming, norming of building out a practice and what the heck does it mean to own and operate this thing. So at the same time that you're trying to keep lights on from a DevOps perspective, you're really trying to build out and understand what the heck this practice even needs to be and who owns what and what are our core responsibilities here around the data. And as you're doing that, the perception of value that your key business constituents, right, and data stakeholders have just wanes. It just tanks, right? Just like the hype cycle. Everybody's super excited. They get it. They understand the value here. They understand it through implementation. And then inevitably, usually, there's things that happen in implementation, especially when we're talking about disparate data from here, there, and everywhere, and the coordination of all these teams and alignment of that. Things take longer, the value, the understanding of value kind of wanes and disappears as you're focused on very finite technical issues to get this thing launched, right? This technical solution launched. And you lose track of that need to tie everybody together in this practice and the view of what it could look like going forward. What is the long-term MDM roadmap for our organization? Because you're only focused on this go live, this thing, right? This one entity that we're going to create, and not focused on really that roadmap of this consistent understanding of value-driven type of roadmap as well. With that, what comes from that? Well, you struggle to fund, right? So we talked about the investment that's key up front, and you're doing, a digital transformation. So there's all this excitement, all this money. Hey, we're going to the cloud, and MDM's, going to be a big part of taking us there. And you got this chunk of money and then it does the implementation and you spent that, and now you want to do all the other cool stuff that you could build onto that entity that you just made. And you go to talk to people and they're like, I don't have money for that. And you don't have money for that, right? Because you've got a DevOps type budget that allows you to do keeping the lights on, right? And not any of the expansion things that really bring innumerable and expansive value to your organization. When we do keep a focus and we keep this team kind of aligned, this cross-functional team, to the practice of MDM and not only what it does and how it applies the technology to build business value for organizations, when we keep that line of sight onward and we keep that team together and a focus around that, this is where we're able to avoid kind of that trough, right? And we're all focused on this future venture that doesn't stop at go live, it really just starts, right? So you continue that enthusiasm, you continue increasing the perception of value that MDM can provide for the overall organization, because you're attaching it to that business value and a future business value as well.